So for a country like us, where, I mean, there doesn't seem to be much scope to, as much as economists and Treasury officials would argue there is scope, there doesn't seem any political appetite to reduce the size of government. Isn't this a good thing for a country like Australia to sign up for, Dan?
It might be a good thing for Australia's politicians, but I don't think it's a good idea for Australian taxpayers, for the Australian economy, because the same principles that apply in Australia apply in the United States, apply all over the world. Eh, Let's back up for a second and focus on what really matters here.
Okay.
Corporations, businesses do not pay taxes. They collect taxes. But when you're talking about the economic incidence of those taxes, not to sound like a boring economist,
Mhm.
but you know as well as I know that taxes are borne by workers, consumers, and shareholders. Now, I suppose if you lean to the left, you might say, "Oh, but I bet most of those taxes are borne by shareholders. Shareholders are more likely than average to be rich, so let's go ahead and do this." Well, okay, maybe you're right about the incidence of the tax being borne mostly by shareholders, but what happens when you're therefore reducing investment in the economy? And since every single economic theory, I mean, even Marxism, they all agree that investment is what drives productivity, and productivity is what drives wages. So even if you assume the corporate tax is borne by shareholders, it's still very bad for your domestic economy. And that's true in the United States. It's true in Europe. It's true in China, and it's true in Australia. Now, I, of course, think that a lot of the tax is borne by workers, and not just indirectly through reduced investment, but also just via the hiring decisions and employment decisions of companies. So I just don't think it's a very good idea. I mean, heck, it's worth noting that the OECD is one of the most pro-tax harmonization bureaucracies, but the research from economists at the OECD say per dollar collected, the corporate income tax is arguably the most damaging tax you could possibly have. So I don't like tax cartels in general. I don't like politicians conspiring against taxpayers, but certainly the worst of the worst in terms of that approach is to create a cartel for higher global corporate tax rates. I just don't think it's a good idea, assuming that you care about the well-being of ordinary people rather than the self-interest of politicians.